Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa, your host, along with Adam Schrader, and we have another awesome guest on the show today. His name is Josh Cyphers. He is the president of Nvoicepay, which is a FLEETCOR company. You may have heard of FLEETCOR, quite large corporation. For the past 20 years, Josh has managed successful growth for a variety of companies, from startups to Fortune 100 companies. Prior to Nvoicepay, Josh held leadership roles at Microsoft, Nike, Fiserv, and several growth stage tech companies. He's a lapsed CPA. Now, FLEETCOR, again, for those who may not know, they provide fuel cards and workforce payment products and services. Their customers include businesses, commercial fleets, oil companies, petroleum marketers, and government. So Josh is here to talk more about Nvoicepay. Josh Cyphers, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thanks, Naresh. It's good to be here.
I know in the intro I talked a little bit about what FLEETCOR and Nvoicepay do, but tell us a little bit more about both FLEETCOR and Nvoicepay and their best enhanced work from home solutions for our listeners, business owners, and other work from home providers.
Sure, I'm happy to. So FLEETCOR purchased Nvoicepay a little over a year ago. For the last several years, FLEETCOR has been making a lot of investments in addressing the problems they've seen and their customers have seen when it comes to corporate payments. Nvoicepay was quickly becoming the enterprise leader in B2B payment automation. And FLEETCOR really saw the value that we provided, and their customers saw it as well. And given that momentum, FLEETCOR thought it made a lot of sense to acquire Nvoicepay and make it part of its corporate payment strategy and really build it in so that they can provide even more services to corporates and really help with the whole B2B payment automation.
On the Nvoicepay website, it breaks it down really by industries that y'all serve too. Does it work differently across different industries, or you just see different industries needing different things, or why do y'all kind of break it down by industry?
So we've definitely been pulled into certain industries. I would say that some industries have kind of figured out how to pay their suppliers and do it effectively, do it efficiently, and do it in a way that creates a good supplier experience. Other industries are still kind of behind the times. And where we really saw our momentum take off is when companies realized check was just too cumbersome, and vendors really didn't want to get paid by check. They wanted to be paid electronically. And check has the highest fraud risk. So as these things kind of came to a head, we've seen this kind of slow transition from check-based payments and these manual paper-based processes to a more automated digital payment process. And that's where we stepped in. And I would say the industries that we've been most successful in have the biggest problem. And that's why we've kind of been pulled into those industries.
Can you describe your digital payment workflow for remote payments, approvals, and other processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, check's been around for years. Kind of the old-fashioned way, and unfortunately the way a lot of companies still do it today, is your AP person would cut a check after an invoice has been approved. They'd print it out, they'd staple it or paperclip it to the invoice, and they'd create the stack of unsigned checks. They'd go and deliver that to the controller or the CFO or the CEO, whoever in the business had the authority to sign the check. That person would then physically sign and review each check and invoice. And then someone in accounts payable would be sent back, and a clerk or somebody would sit there and stuff it in an envelope, put postage on, and send it out in the mail. Super burdensome, super time consuming, no real value add other than a slight internal control by having that signature.
It sounds painful.
It is, yeah. And I'm sure you all have paid your own bills. Consumer bill pay, I think, is ahead of business bill pay in terms of automation. But it's never fun to pay bills and to do the checks and cut them and mail them. Very cumbersome. And now, with COVID hitting and AP teams for the first time really in the history of AP working remotely, it's presented even more challenges and problems for companies.
So can you kind of explain how Nvoicepay cuts down on that, and kind of what's the process that people go through then?
Yeah, so instead of printing out the check and having the invoice approved and printed out as well, like we serve all of that up in a cloud-based UI that allows them to not only do the approval workflow, but also eventually hit the pay button once it is approved, which will then route it through our network, and we'll go out and we'll make those payments to your suppliers based on the payment preferences you have. And the method of payment becomes very important in these conversations between AP and suppliers, because a lot of suppliers require getting paid by check or by ACH or whatever means. And we facilitate not only figuring out what method your supplier prefers, but also managing the payment data so you don't have to. And we know how that supplier likes to get paid, and we pay that supplier for you how they want to be paid.
Regarding how to be paid, are you looking at implementing cryptocurrency if somebody wants to be paid in crypto?
We've done some preliminary research on it. Kind of the early indicators have suggested it's not in a huge demand in the corporate payment space. It's nothing that the companies are really requiring now. And with solutions like ours, where we manage the vendor information and all the payment information, we keep that housed, and we've protected and secured that for our customers so that they don't have to, and that the supplier has a reliable source to update that information. We do the verification and validation. And so we haven't seen a strong need for that, and we've kind of solved it in our own unique way.
What's your sweet spot in terms of like size of the business that y'all are really targeting?
I would say anywhere between 100 million in annual revenues to 5 billion in annual revenues. We have customers all along that spectrum. We really are focused on enterprise payment automation, and the biggest problems we solve tend to show up where people have the most payments, and really a lot of risk associated with potential payment fraud.
Yeah, so it kind of seems like you're meant for large corporations that are now probably have gone to work from home models, have employees work from home, and this just kind of makes that process easier since everyone is dispersed and working from home.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Naresh, I'm a former CPA. I guess the state requires me to say lapsed CPA. I've managed AP teams. I've managed AR. Like I've been kind of down in the weeds on it, and I never could imagine in my life, like having an entire accounts payable team try to work remotely. And most of the customers and the companies that I talk to, they haven't been able to successfully pull that off. There's always some amount of mail that some number of people need to come in and pick up and process and sort through. We really help that. And we help it not only for our customers in terms of sending payments electronically and completely outsourced, but also for suppliers, because we've definitely seen an increase in suppliers asking for electronic payments so they don't have to send people into the office to get the mailed paper checks.
So how do y'all, in terms of, outsourcing all of this to y'all, how do you put what's your interface for the business owners so that they feel, a comfort level with y'all? So whenever, what are they able to control, and what are, y'all completely controlling that they don't really get the touch?
Yeah, so they completely control the workflow and the approvals and the users. And so they can set up all sorts of, varying approval configurations. And a lot of times you might have seen kind of dual signature checks. So think that concept, maybe these checks, we want this person to approve. Anything above a certain amount, we want someone else to approve, or the CFO to approve. So we configure all that for them. They have complete control over that with the right user access and permissions that are configured by us in working with them and them defining what those are. So it's all really a pretty simple UI. We're ERP agnostic, so accept basically any file format out of their ERP, whatever works best for them, so they don't have to get their IT department involved and do this complex integration. Like we do a lot on the file mapping and consumption side, so we're able to process their data and then process the payments. They can see their vendors and how we pay them, and the contact information in the portal as well, so they know, who the payments are going to. And then we also indemnify the payment. So if if there's ever a mistake or something on our side, like, we'll cover it. And that very rarely, if ever, happens. But we provide them that guarantee because the amount of time and effort we put behind security and behind managing that vendor information.
You touched on fraud. So how does your product help mitigate fraud risk?
Yeah, that's something kind of near and dear to my heart. Commercial payment fraud has historically been highest on check. And so you might have seen with banks and, and all the check, all these little things they put in place, like positive payee, watermarks, all these kind of fraud deterrent mechanisms and systems and controls that they've put in place over the years to try and prevent check fraud. Well, what we've seen over the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years is actually a significant decline in check fraud. It's starting to drop off, but overall B2B payment fraud is actually increasing. And why it's increasing is because of this shift from check payments to ACH or electronic payments. And the problem is the banks and most accounting departments or corporates haven't really developed the same level of internal control around an ACH payment as they have around a check payment. So check's been around forever. All this time to develop controls, your bank stepped in, developed a bunch of controls, but now you're moving to ACH. It's a whole new world. The money goes out fast. And if you're not careful, and where we've seen this real spike in fraudulent activity is what is called, or the FBI calls, business email compromise, or think of vendor email compromise. So a fraudster or a bad actor might circumvent your vendor systems, pose as your vendor for a while, and then know when there's a big payment about to be made to that vendor, contact your AP team, and we're talking, hourly, probably low-paid AP clerks. Contact them and say, hey, my bank information changed, send it to this bank account right before that big payment goes out. And you can see this in news article after news article. I think Caterpillar was hit with multi-million-dollar loss. Toyota was hit with a multi-million-dollar loss. It's really becoming more and more common, and the fraudsters are becoming more and more sophisticated. So if you're managing your vendor information yourself, or your bank's managing it for you, or you're doing your payments to your bank, and there's any way that a vendor or a fraudster, can get in and circumvent your controls and change that information, there's a big risk. And the payment fraud in ACH is really on the rise.
So what's been the hardest part as you're going to these companies and pitching them your services? What's been the biggest hurdle for your company as you make that sales pitch? What's the thing you have to break through in a business owner or CFO's mind to get them to seriously think about your product?
No, it's a great question, and it honestly is something we think about all the time. And what it actually is it's kind of funny. So the biggest hurdle we usually have to overcome is they say, look, we don't have time for a massive implementation. Like, they understand the value in everything we do, and in their heads they're thinking, geez, this system is so sophisticated, so configurable, so good, it must take months to implement. And they're thinking, we've done some research on this and some surveys, and they're thinking 6 to 9 months to implement. And so that's really the biggest obstacle we've had to overcome, because in reality, it doesn't take months, it takes weeks. We do all the work for you. Like I mentioned earlier, we do the file mapping. We consume your data in your formats. So we don't require any development or minimal development on your side and some engagement on configuration, but we can really get customers up quickly with very little involvement on them. It's a very, very light touch integration or implementation. But it's hard to convince people, especially finance people who've been through ERP implementations or, a lot of these workflow software implementations, that it's actually not going to be months, it's only going to be weeks.
Talking about remote work environments, how have the lockdowns, the pandemic, how have they impacted your business? And do you expect remote work environments to be permanent as a result?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to take this stance to move to permanent remote work environments or more flexible remote work environments. that's been made clear. I think you see it in headlines and, major corporations, Fortune 100s that are saying these are the permanent changes we're making already. It really has an impact because, as I mentioned before, I've worked in AP. AP was built, it's kind of like most IT systems at companies. AP was really built with physical presence in mind. And AP is really the central kind of internal control over your most liquid asset, being cash, right? And so AP's function and design on a physical presence, which has historically always been the case, where you have invoices and file cabinets, you have vendor information in a file, you have somebody you can talk to confirm one thing, you have the processes where it jumps from desk to desk to desk, and one person can talk to another if there seems to be a discrepancy. Like all of those internal controls and processes for AP were designed with physical presence in mind, almost that kind of moat orientation as you might hear it referred to in IT. Now, blow that all up, make it remote, and put it in your people's cars and homes and gyms and wherever they're going with their laptop. And that's pretty problematic. And CFOs are going to need to start, if they haven't already, reevaluating their internal controls, making sure they're SOX compliant. It's a big, massive change to send out your AP team and have them work remote.
Yeah, how big are the security concerns in that regard? Because, people aren't, and does it increase the risk of fraud as people are on their home networks, which are much easier to, get into and mess with than like a business server? Kind of what are y'all doing to mitigate that risk?
No, that's exactly right. Like now they've got their home computers, those can be hacked, or they're taking them to the coffee shop or, wherever in public. The other thing, that scares me a lot, that I see as a very realistic scenario is they have these files that used to sit in your file cabinets under lock and key, and they have them in their cars, right? And their car gets stolen. And now all of a sudden there's a stack of checks in somebody's car that got stolen, right? And so, yeah, the scenarios are scary. Again, AP wasn't meant to be remote. It's probably the last of the functions I think will end up being permanently remote. But in this time, like we've had a flood of interest from companies of all industries and all sizes looking for a solution like ours. Hey, we've got to figure this thing out. We can't have, people carrying checks around in their car, printing checks out at home, driving the checks over to the CFO's house to get signed. Like we got to take the paper out of the payment process, and we've really got to make sure that we have some internal controls covered that we've just all of a sudden ripped up and pushed out into people's cars and homes. So yeah, we've seen a big uptick in interest and conversations, and quite frankly, the number of customers we've added, since COVID has hit. We've always solved a problem around payment automation and security and control, and that's just been escalated and accelerated. The other piece of that is, we've seen this slow decline in check payments over the last 10 years go from maybe 50% of payments by check to more recently 40% of payments by check. That's definitely accelerated over the last several months.
Great. Well, Josh Cyphers, we really appreciate you coming on the Work From Home show. He's the president of Nvoicepay, a FLEETCOR company, very well-known management lapse, CPA, and management guru. The website is that's the letter N, voicepay.com, nvoicepay.com. And also FLEETCOR's website is fleetcor.com. That's fleetcor.com, FLEETCOR.com, fleetcor.com. Josh, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners about your company, about work from home, or anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously this talk, I'm passionate about risk mitigation and payment fraud risk, but just, get a hold of us. We can help understand that transformation and understand the value around it, the operational efficiencies associated with our solution, the risk mitigation, and then, all the other benefits. We also pay vendors by virtual card to accept it so we can get you back a rebate. There's so many benefits to our solution. So, please reach out to us, visit the website, ask for some assistance, and we'd be happy to provide you with a business case and ROI study that will help inform you as you make your decision around better protecting your payments and automating your processes.
Awesome. Well, Josh Cyphers, thanks so much for coming on the Work From Home show. To all our listeners, visit our website, workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. We're giving away all sorts of free stuff. Write us a review on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. We're anywhere and everywhere. Our podcast has been doing extremely well. If you have any comments, if you have any thoughts you want to share about the interview we had with Josh, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Reach out to us at hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next time, keep on working from home.